या कुन्देन्दु तुषारहार धवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रान्विता या वीणां वरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेत पद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शङ्कर प्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा पूजिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा.
Thank you. In the first edition of EJCon, we tackled the issue of climate change. After a raging success, I now invite the president of EJCon, Ms. Anunita Jena, to introduce the theme of EJCon 2021.
Thank you, Divija. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone present here. As mentioned earlier, the theme for this year's conclave is inequality. The issue of inequality is universal, between and within countries. This year, we aim at holding a series of discussions with eminent personalities of inequality through social, economic, and creative outlets in an effort to understand roots of human equity and parity. The 3 days of the conclave address cells of inequality. Day 1 focuses on capital, where we look at discrepancies in distribution of capital, estimation of such inequality, indices discussing and representing such discrepancies. On the second day, we will be exploring entrepreneurship and labor by defining the informal sector, value addition to the labor, and ease of doing business with respect to existing laws. Finally, on the last day, we will review land-based inequality by looking at disaster-induced packages and the problem of displacement due to increasing land prices and rehabilitation programs. Now, it is with great pleasure that I call upon the stage our director, Mrs. Amita Vaidya, who will be introducing today's guest of honor, Ms. LEKHA CHAKRABORTY.
Ma'am, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Good morning, Professor Lekha Chakraborty, faculty in charge of Ka-Ching, Professor Nahid Fatima, and Professor Suranjana, faculty colleagues, invited guests, Anunita, the president of EJCon, and Prithvi, the chairperson of Ka-Ching, the entire Ka-Ching team, and dear students. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the inaugural session of the intercollegiate festival Ka-Ching and the Economic Justice Conclave. A special welcome to Professor Lekha Chakraborty for sparing her time to address the inaugural session. I, along with everyone else, look forward to your talk. It was 10 years ago that the School of Economics was started. It was started with a view to provide economics education that was holistic with practical and application-based learning. The aim was to sensitize students to different economic issues, to make the students think, debate, reflect on different perspectives, and deliberate on them. I'm happy to say that Ka-Ching and EJCon embodies the essence of what the school stands for. So welcome once again, Dr. Chakraborty, and to all the participants from across the country. I wish you all a thought-provoking and fun 3 days here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I now request Professor Suranjana to kindly introduce our respected guest of honor, Ms. Lekha Chakraborty. Ma'am, do you mind unmuting yourself?
Take the opportunity to give a brief introduction of Professor Lekha Chakraborty. We are grateful that you could take out the time from your busy schedule for our event. Professor Lekha Chakraborty is currently associated with National Institute of Public Policy and Public Finance and Policy. She is a pioneer economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India with Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India in 2004. Her areas of interest are macroeconomics of public finance, fiscal federalism, extractive sector economics, and financing human development. She is a renowned columnist in the Financial Express, Business Standard, The Wire, and the Hindustan Times, to name a few. She has been featured in CNBC, ANI, DD News, Air World, Air Service, and Rajya Sabha. She has worked for the IMF, World Bank, and UNESCAP, the UNDP, the UN Women, and the Commonwealth Secretariat for short for the event today. We all, on behalf of SAMSO, again welcome you for this event.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request the most awaited guest of honor to kindly speak a few words.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me for this important deliberation. And it's my privilege and pleasure to inaugurate the series of talks you're going to do on development at disempowerment process and emphasizing on the issues of inequality. A special thanks to Isha Sheikh, and I admire her professionalism, her presence of mind and alertness, and I enjoyed my conversation with her on the content of my presentation today. A special thanks to Isha Sheikh. I enjoyed talking to her. And based on our conversation, what I'm trying to present before the students today is the importance of link between fiscal policy and monetary policy in tackling the inequalities issues which were, aggravated in the time of pandemic. When I speak about the inequality, our pandemic packages are quite emphasizing on an economic recovery, but the pattern is sustainable only if we have backup, provisions and backup programs to control the widening inequality. So it's like a K-shaped recovery, and we need to, emphasis on the inequality issues, and these inequality issues cannot be tackled in a sequential manner. The way in which we are going to focus on economic growth in the beginning, and then we will look into the inequality by the time, that there could be a considerable time lag. So it has to be a simultaneous treatment of growth and inequality to take, this economic recovery in a sustained manner. And let us focus on the macroeconomic framework in which the economic stimulus packages from RBI and from North Bloc has been floated. Of course, the state governments are also equally important in tackling the inequality issues related to pandemic. So when I talk about the central bank policy, as you know, students may be aware of the new monetary framework which has been put forward in our country in February 2016. So as per the monetary framework, the new monetary framework, the central bank of our country is supposed to focus on price stability. So we put forward an inflation targeting framework. So based on the inflation targeting, you peg your interest rate or policy rate based on an inflation anchor, which in our country it is 4%, and of course within a band of +2 or -2. And then we have inflation expectation survey in our country. Based on that, the deviation of this angle from the expectation is calculated, and it is also based on a variable called output gap. And output gap is nothing but the deviation of the potential GDP from the actual GDP. So there are issues in the calculation of potential GDP in our country. We use the econometric filters, to arrive at the potential GDP by taking out the cyclicality, and we call that trend as potential. So there are concerns that these are the very good methodology to arrive at the potential output. And these methodological concerns I am not going deep into, but one thing I would like to flag here is, this concept of output gap is primarily based on the assumption that there is business cycle operating in an emerging economy context. But it is like, people are divided, economists are divided in terms of an understanding where there is business cycles or our growth recovery is cyclical, or the issues we are dealing with are structural in nature. So if the issues are not cyclical, then monetary policy and fiscal policy tackling the kind of growth issues in the time of pandemic, that can be, quite, the unaware of the real issues. You know what I mean? The business cycles may not exist in the context of an emerging economy. You can have a look into the writings by the chief economist of IMF, Geeta Gopinath, but it's not in the context of India, but her paper in the context of Mexico. She mentioned that cycle is trend. That is the title of her paper. So there is a controversy whether there is business cycle exists in a context of an emerging economy or not. If there is no business cycle, then fiscal policy or monetary policy, putting forward the program as a counter-cyclical policy tool may not work when the things are structural in nature. So this we have to keep in mind. The second point I would like to flag here is, if we focus on, and in the introduction, the young speakers before me, they have rightly pointed out that if we focus on the economic growth paradigm, we may not get our recovery quite right, because inequality issues, that will not automatically get tackled. If you're focusing on a growth paradigm, and if you don't focus on the humanitarian issues which is mounting in our country, our growth recovery may not be a sustained one. So inequality is quite an important topic or important issue in the context of pandemic, and we need to have specific policy tools in addition to the growth-related policy tools to have this inequality tackled. Otherwise, the income inequalities can get added add-on, and it can have a domino effect on all kinds of inequality, including gender inequality, spatial inequality, and we need to have that kind of a development perspective in mind to tackle this, rather than focusing narrowly on economic growth recovery. I'm so happy to see the high frequency indicators in our country suggesting an economic recovery, but we cannot celebrate that at this moment because unless we address the mounting humanitarian issues related to, the labor, because if you look at the labor market, the way the jobs plummeted in our country or anywhere in the world for that matter in the context of pandemic and the issues related to the wage, and the other kinds of inequalities, then, the recovery may not sustain for long. But I'm quite happy that the economy is showing the signs of recovery. And you must be remembering the articulations of RBI governor that whatever it takes to deal with the pandemic, we need to, go ahead with that. That's the narrative, whatever it takes to. And also we have seen in the writings and in the, our finance minister has spoken, Nirmala Sitharaman has spoken that the budget is going to be, never like before budget. So we are waiting to see what kinds of economic stimulus, if any, or what are the kinds of policy imperatives our finance minister is going to, have a roadmap in the upcoming budget to deal with these inequality issues. And when it comes to the, monetary policy issues, then central bank was focusing.
I think ma'am is facing some issues. Till then, to the audience, please feel free to put in your questions in the questions tab towards your right. And we're sorry for the inconvenience. We are trying to get ma'am back in. Just give us a few moments. Thank you.
In the fiscal policy side, we have, fiscal group. When I was talking to Isha, I promised her that I will take up both the monetary and the fiscal policy issues and talk about how these policy tools can, tackle the inequality. And fiscal policy, unless we frame appropriate policy perspectives to deal with inequality, it can be just quite confined to the rules-based framework where we have an FRBM in our country, the fiscal responsibility and the budget management. And as for that, we have to keep the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio to 3% of GDP, and we have the public debt to GDP, which was a threshold of 60, but it's mounting now. So whether deficit is good or should we fear deficit in the time of pandemic? So that's the question now economists are grappling with, and there's a lot of, fear debates happening in our country regarding that. And it's quite a kind of a consensus economists are reaching regarding that the deficit is good and a timely deficit in the time of pandemic, for the targeted spending, which is required for the public infrastructure in health sector, for tackling the digital divide that's happening in the education sector, because otherwise the enrollment and the literacy levels we have attained, they can go back to pre-70s levels. So that's a matter of that's a matter of concern. We cannot, tackle with the online education because we are also trying to grapple with and with the learning and unlearning, the new kind of forum like the advancement of technology and the space providing us when the world is shut down. We are trying to communicate through this technology platform. So the kind of digital infrastructure requirements and the support and the new skills, these are coming up to keep the knowledge networking going on and the education sustained at the level which our country has reached. So in the 2020 UNDP Human Development Report, if you look at that Human Development Index, it is based on the three dimensions. It's based on education, health, and income. So health, of course, there's a new kind of interpretation required for the health indicators because there is a dual crisis. It's a public health crisis and a macroeconomic crisis. So then look into the education, the effective enrollment rate. It is based on, the access of students to the technology, the access of students to the, the digital infrastructure. Based on that, the effective enrollment rate need to calculate. And if you look at the third dimension income, livelihood crisis is mounting. So these three aspects of inequality, to me, we need to, tackle with economic firefighting packages. So if you unpack the economic stimulus packages, you can see two components. One is the economic firefighting package to deal with the, issues instantaneously. The other is every crisis contains the seeds of opportunity. So this is also a time in which we can float medium to long-term reform measures. And we have floated the labor reforms and the other kinds of, we have the bankruptcy reforms. So there are kinds of reforms also we are trying to float in the context of pandemic to tackle the inequality in the long run. And whether the fiscal marksmanship operates or not is a matter of concern because whatever we announce as the pandemic package is one thing, and what is actually translated into the actual spending and real outcomes is yet another. And there are issues of budget credibility even prior to pandemic. The moment we open the budget and look at what is the budget estimate and what is the actual spending. And there is a considerable deviation between what finance minister promised and, how it is translated to actual spending. So pandemic packages announcement is one thing, but fiscal marksmanship is yet another. Unless we have our fiscal marksmanship perfect by, no deviation between what is announced and what is actually realized, then there are issues with which, we get the outcomes in the long term. So this is another thing. And in the forthcoming budget, as our RBI Governor Shaktikant Das has rightly pointed out, it's going to be a proper budget, and how we tackle the concept of deficit is a matter of concern. Because there is a tendency now, for financing the capital spending, we have a tendency to ask the public sector enterprises to take the borrowing procedures. So, one thing, if the public sector enterprises are going forward with the borrowing, procedures, then that will not show up in the fiscal deficit. So the fiscal deficit numbers, which finance minister has articulated in the last budget is, bereft or is devoid of this off-budget borrowing. But of course, I do remember there is an annexure in the budget which shows that what is the off-budget borrowing. So is it the time to show the deficit is up by incorporating the off-budget liabilities also into the deficit concept? Or is that the key? So we have to read the numbers very carefully. The moment when we get the budget, two things can happen. One, fiscal deficit numbers can shoot up, but whether the fiscal number, increase in the fiscal deficit number, is incorporating what we call as off-budget liabilities into the deficit concept and show that the clean numbers, whether that is going to happen, or even after incorporating the off-budget borrowings, then we have an enhanced spending in public health infrastructure, education, and to tackle the livelihood crisis. Whether that additional spend is there or not, we need to see. The moment we incorporate the borrowing done by the PSUs, that's called a new concept, that is public sector borrowing requirement. But the deficit concept in India, the operational parameter, is fiscal deficit. So whether we are moving towards PSBR, a different concept of deficit, by incorporating the borrowings of the public sector enterprises, or we are sticking to the fiscal deficit and showing that the increase in, the expenditure designed in the programs which are required to tackle the pandemic in terms of health and education is yet another. But in the time of pandemic, of course, we cannot say education, health, these are soft sectors, because if we consider education and health, the social sector, as a soft sector, not as a commanding type of Indian economy, then the inequalities are going to widen. So in order to tackle the inequality, we should have the expenditure design and the allocation required for the social sectors, especially health and education. Otherwise, the recovery in the growth may not be sustained in the long run. So to me, the commanding heights of the Indian economy should be the prima facie soft sectors like education and health. And also another, important area of concern is the mounting labor crisis, migration crisis, which we need to tackle. Otherwise, it can add up to the inequality. So how fiscal policy and monetary policy tackle inequality is a question. And if you look at over time in the Treasury, UN has floated the MDGs and SDGs as the global goals to tackle these kinds of inequalities. But prior to that, everything was articulated in terms of economic growth, and that could be a matter of concern. And second issue is, if you look at the macroeconomic framework of our country, it's like you can appreciate a transition from applying the discretion of policymaker to more or less we have rules-based monetary policy and fiscal policy on board. So then we have the rules-based framework like fiscal deficit, how we incorporate the specific policy tools to address inequality issues is a matter of concern, and that's a matter of urgent concern. So we have to introduce specific policy tools when the macroeconomic framework is quite rigid. And here, what is of paramount importance is how we play with the debt deficit dynamic. This is a time in which we need not fear deficits, but they are not talking about an open-ended fiscal procedure. Because the moment we talk about we can allow deficit to go up, there should be an excessive deficit procedure roadmap which we require to keep it ready so that the deficit can return to the equilibrium in the long term. So that roadmap is very important because economic stimulus packages of short-term nature. At the same time, an abrupt rollback of whatever we have announced can also lead to widening inequalities. So the financial year 2021, I don't think that there will be an abrupt rollback of the economic stimulus package we announced in our country. So because that can affect. So mainly debt deficit dynamics we need to tackle very meticulously and very judiciously. Second, there should not be any abrupt, and I don't think that there will be an abrupt rollback because it's a very stable kind of start. Because we are announcing economic stimulus packages in the continuum and trying to address issues. But here my concern is, so far, Ministry of Finance has been very careful that the revenue stability is as a principle is the basis of expenditure design. That's the philosophy in which Finance Ministry was designing the pandemic package, because economists were asking for going for even the single rate financing of deficit. The single rate financing of deficit is like in the times of pandemic we need money, and even you go for or taking help from the RBI, but going for a fiscal monetary policy engages by printing money to finance specific public financial requirements. And that's quite I'm not exactly talking about the helicopter money. Helicopter money is like either a cash transfer to the household or to the firm, so that there will be a stimulation to the economy and the economic recovery can be faster. But the moment, Rajya, as you rightly pointed out, the problem with helicopter money is that the moment people try to think that we need to save, we cannot spend in the times of pandemic, then even the helicopter money as a innovative tool cannot function properly. And this idea was first floated by Ben Bernanke in Fed Reserve. So that's why he's called the helicopter Ben. But the moment, the propensity of saving is more than the propensity of spend, the helicopter money cannot function perfect. So that's a concern. And if you look at the numbers, the empirical data shows that in the time of pandemic, the savings is going up. Household savings, the private savings have gone up, or the precautionary savings, and that's quite understandable. But at the same time, there's the concern. If you look at the GDP numbers, it's a consumption-led growth, and that cannot be sustained in the long run. So how we can take back the growth towards an investment-led growth? So that's a concern. Unless we have the public infrastructure investment, back on board, because it's limiting like anything. The central government, of course, state governments are doing the heavy lifting. So there is an emphasis for the private corporate investment to be triggered. There won't be any financial crowding out in that sense. Like if you increase your deficit, that's going to crowd out your private investment. No. The economic analysis done by me, because it's the famous economics which you must be knowing, Rishikesh Vinod and the C.R. Rao in their book on the handbook of econometrics based on R. If you look at that paper of mine, we got to this that public infrastructure is the significant variable that's required for the private corporate investment. And in that sense, the monetary policy, reducing the repo rate or keeping the repo rate at 4% may not be, satisfactorily contain permitting a corporate investment. So to support the corporate investment, there is a fiscal imperative as well. And how we play that right is something, a matter of concern to be looked into. So these are the quick thoughts I thought that I will flag. And my last point is, when we think about economic recovery and addressing inequality concerns, what kind of policies, policymakers decide, whether it's a participation income or universal basic income. It's a very prominent debate. What is more powerful in tackling inequality questions? Like universal basic income, you don't have to participate in the economic activity. It is ensured, and a judicious, policy mix of these two are important. Participation income is when everything else fails, government acts as an employer of last resort. The government is guaranteeing employment to people. So in order to give employment guarantee, you need to increase the allocation. And in the upcoming budget, we need to see whether that's happening or not. So in the question of participation income versus universal basic income, I think a judicious mix of both participation income and basic income, it's very important to define the package. We have already announced the cash transfers to the poor households in the stimulus package number 1. But whether we need to scale it up is a matter which we need to urgently look into. But we have announced the cash transfers to the poor households and the direct benefit transfers. And I stop here, Isha, and look forward to your questions. That's fine.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'll switch over to Divija now for the audience questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for this stimulating talk. Given the economic measures undertaken to reduce the impacts of the pandemic, your comments are indeed timely in the midst of such a divisive topic. As much as the subject intrigues me, our audience is curious to know your thoughts on some aspects. So, taking our first question for today, where can India expect to stand through successful trading of the vaccine?
Yeah. Isha, I can see some 5 questions at a time, and then I will answer so that I can address more questions. Is that fine for you? So I can take 5 questions at a time.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead reading the.
So our first question is, where can India expect to stand through successful trading of the vaccine? And the second question is, has the advance of the RBI through consecutive monetary policies reflected in the economy? The third question would be, what has economics learned from this particular pandemic? Fourth one would be, in special cases such as this pandemic, should we go morally and ignore the building fiscal deficit due to assistance or focus on the economic stance for the long run? And finally, the fifth question would be, the World Bank and UN both agree that any progress made towards equality in the past has been lost due to the pandemic. Can't we conclude from this that healthcare is the most decisive cost, one of the highest costs incurred individually?
Divija, kindly repeat the last question.
The World Bank and UN, both United Nations, both agree that any progress made towards equality in the past has been lost due to the pandemic. Can't we conclude from this that healthcare is the most decisive cost, that is, one of the highest costs incurred individually?
Thank you. Okay, Isha, can I answer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, brilliant questions. Like asking about the public health infrastructure, about the monetary and the fiscal policy, and also the role of the multilateral organizations in tackling this. And let me talk about the fiscal deficit question first, because I'm from a fiscal policy institute working with the Ministry of Finance. It's a research institute. So the question, whether we should forget about deficit this time, and we can allow, a bit of deficit this time. I think I go with the students' concern that I think yes, we should not fear about deficit right now, because this is the momentum which we have to tackle the economic growth. We need to have the recovery on board. and the fiscal policy and economic growth, that linkage is quite strong. We need to define the expenditure programs. For that, we need money. So the revenue stability or the revenue uncertainty in that time, we should have the deficit dynamics correct. So I go by that, and we should be focusing more on growth and inequality and the humanitarian concerns, rather than fearing that if you spend your deficit is going to go up. But the good the feature or the sign is that the tax buoyancy is getting better when compared to the previous month. So if the tax buoyancy is a path towards fiscal consolidation, then we don't have to fear much. But if expenditure compression is the path to fiscal consolidation, that's a matter of concern. That's why we have to look at both the trajectory towards the fiscal consolidation as well as the levels or the target we have in mind to keep the deficit under control. And coming to the monetary policy question, in March 2021, that is, just 2 months ahead, there will be a revision in the new monetary framework because it's 5 years now. So I don't know whether there will be a complete rollback from the inflation targeting framework, or there will be just slight revision in the nominal anchor, which we assumed as 4. And, we have the band of plus or minus 2. That's quite, we need to see how RBI is going to do the revision or whether it will be kept untouched. We need to wait and see. Here the concern is when the repo rate is 4% and when the CPI inflation has gone beyond 6% or 7%, you are literally into a negative rate of interest. And negative rate of interest is a matter of concern. One quick example coming to my mind is the pension market. So like if your parents are, the hard-earned money they're putting in the pension fund, and if you are told that the interest rate is negative, you are not even getting back the money you have, placed, right? So negative interest rate is a matter of concern in that manner. But the world, the globe, we are facing a problem with related to liquidity trap. So the powers of monetary policy to function as the counter-cyclical policy tool or to tackle the pandemic, that can be quite constrained. So there should be a fiscal predominance to address these concerns. And here the World Bank and the UN, I can see Isha's question. Thanks for forwarding me that. Of course, the accommodative of the RBI through the monetary policies that has to continue for some more time. It has to be accommodative. And thanks, Isha, for sending me even the text. It's helping me a lot. And the corporate tax cut question. We have already cut the corporate taxes. But in the times of revenue uncertainty, I don't know how far the tax policy tools will be able to tackle the inequality issues. I do, value the question asked to me whether the tax cuts or the monetary policies can tackle the inequality question. To me, my answer is you go through the expenditure triggers. Public expenditure is a powerful policy tool to have the players on board rather than through the taxation base. So that's what I do believe. And of course, the RBI has focused on life-side measures. We have infused the liquidity. Liquidity infusion has happened to the economy. And as the student rightly pointed out in her or his question, that unless we tackle the downside issues, we won't be able to get the triggers or whether the liquidity infusion will not work effectively. So the demand stimulation, that's quite a matter of concern, but there is a slow demand recovery happening, and that's a positive sign. To sustain that, what are the policies required? That we have to wait and see. And regarding the vaccine rollout, and it's a function of both central and the state governments. and we need to see that it is effectively done, and the financing will not be a concern, and that is why, Prime Minister of our country and the state and center, the federalism, the fiscal federalism framework is working hand to hand to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for answering our enthusiastic audience. Before we end, ma'am, would you like to give any closing comments?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this brilliant question. And, as the concluding comment, what I have to, put on board is the global growth has shrunk, and we are revising the estimates in such a short time. And though there are signs of recovery, things are not on the sustained, path of, equilibrium in terms of addressing the inequalities. The UN has, commissioned a study, and I'm doing that. Like, what are the kinds of inequalities and the human rights issues related to the pandemic? We need to address that with the same rigor as we address the issues of opening up the economy and the economic growth. Unless we do that, when I talk about the inequalities issues which we need to tackle, it's related to the food security issues, the social protection measures, the social infrastructure along with the physical infrastructure, and the employment regeneration issues. So these four areas, unless we give the vigor, or if we give the emphasis, then our economic recovery path will not be a sustained one. And that's the punchline which I would like to put forward. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed interacting with students, and special thanks to Isha, for your brilliance and for your kindness, and helping me to tackle technological issues which I am quite new. Thank you.
Pleasure, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. Now I would request Chairperson Ka-Ching, Mr. Prithvi Dhirwani, to give the vote of thanks.
Good morning, everyone, once again. Honorable Chief Ms. Lekha Chakraborty, respected Director Vaidya, the faculty in charge, and all the participants. It's an honor for me to have the opportunity to give a vote of thanks on this special day. I'd like to extend my thanks to our chief guest, Ms. Lekha Chakraborty, to take out time from a busy schedule to grace the event. Thank you for inspiring us and encouraging us with your words today. I would also like to thank the organizing team, volunteers, for making this seminar successful. Lastly, I would also like to thank our sponsors for making this whole event possible. Thank you so much.